Okay, and I'll get my presentation going. And welcome to day 3. We're going to get into some more advanced CSS positioning, some more advanced selectors, and a introduction to a layout. So the first hour, we're going to mainly be talking about positioning and selectors. And I'll also show you a little bit of it's kind of like a game where you can use CSS selectors to work your way through levels. It's like a little memory aid that'll help you remember all the different types of advanced selectors. And we'll go over that as well this first hour. So first, let's talk about positioning. So I'm going to open up my folders here again. Start a new demo. So we can get this going. Demo 10-25. And I'm going to open up VS Code. Find that folder. And I'm going to create 2 files. Index.html. I will put my boilerplate in here. Put a title in there, and then I'll create my second file, which is styles.css. And can someone tell me how to wire the styles CSS up to the HTML?
I'll create a link element.
Exactly, link element. And I'm going to click the CSS to get a little bit of the autocomplete done. And I'll just make this plural because my file has a plural name. For some reason, they autocomplete it without a plural name. Okay. So I'm going to go over some different elements. And to do this, I'm not going to really get that semantic with the HTML this time. I'm just going to show you how a lot of these elements kind of work with each other. So let me I'll still create a main, so we have a little bit of semantic stuff going on, and a heading just to test the content. And we'll go live and make sure it works. And that's tiny. Let's get that zoom back into normal. And I'm also going to grab my reset.css. So I'm going to have another file in there. So I'm just going to search reset CSS. I'll take the top link. It's a pretty simple file. And it doesn't really do anything too unexpected. And I'm going to create another CSS file and paste that in. And I'm not even going to format this. I'm just going to let it have this block here so it's not as long of a file. And then I'm going to link that in above my styles.css. Remember, it has to go above it. Otherwise, none of your styles that are being currently reset will actually be applied. And then let's check the browser and make sure that worked. And there we go. We no longer have that larger font size. And it looks like it also took the font weight off, and it got rid of the margin top and margin left. So everything is reset and positioned nicely. It gives us a nice clean slate to work with.
Can you please repeat the steps for this reset, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always just start with a search. I'd go CSS reset or reset CSS, either way. And I take the top link. You can take almost any one of these links. They're all going to have their own version of a reset. I just picked the first one because it doesn't do as much. It's a little bit less of aggressive of a reset. And then you just copy this code block by highlighting it and hitting copy. And then you create a second CSS file. I called this one reset.css. I'll just create a new one here. I'll delete this one. So I'll create a new file called reset.css. And all that code I just copied, I'm going to paste now. And that's it. It's still wired up here because it's in the link. And again, the link has to go above the styles.css. If I reverse these, and let's say I change my H1 font size, I'll change this to 50 pixels so it's nice and large. And I'll look at the browser and nothing happens. And that's because I have the reset under my style. So if I switch these around and I look at my browser, now we can see the 50 pixels there. And that's because I'm applying the 50 pixels and then I'm resetting it back to 12 pixels or whatever this is set at. 16 pixels, I believe, since it's set to 100%. So in this right here, you can see all of the selectors that are being reset. We're just saying on every single one of these elements, get rid of any margin, padding, border, just get rid of everything. And that way we can start with a clean slate. Okay, so I'm going to leave the larger font size on the H1 just so we have our heading. And I'm going to create an element here. And I'm going to use a div as like a divider here, just so I have a container to work in. And we'll create a p tag. And I'm just going to do a little bit of lorem, just one block of lorem. So now what I want to do is I want to select this p tag, this paragraph, and I'm gonna mess around with some of the positioning just to show you how this works. Let me get a couple of these in here so we can compare them. And I'll actually give these a background color as well, each. So we'll do a class first, class second, class third. Yes, Ryan.
I was just going to ask if you could show one more time what you did to the H1 and the reset.
Yeah, so did you see where I got the reset from, the code?
I did. I already went and got it and everything. I'm just going in and setting it up now the way you did.
So I just set a font size on my H1 to be 50 pixels so that it's not the same size as everything else. And what I was demonstrating here was if I put my reset underneath of styles, it doesn't apply. You can see that it's the same size of all my paragraphs right now. But if I put the reset up first, then my styles will override anything that I have in my reset. All this reset is doing is getting rid of the default browser font sizes, border and padding so that you have a clean slate to work on. And then you tell it what sizes you want everything to be manually.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's really helpful. I mean, it looks like we're creating more work for ourselves because this already had like font weight 700, already had a larger font size. But it does create more work later, and it can create a lot of bugs that are hard to figure out. So having a reset just solves a lot of those problems. It's like having a clean piece of canvas to paint on rather than trying to paint around a stain. Okay, so we have first, second, and third. These are my class names. You remember how to select a class name in CSS? Anybody at all?
It's with a dot, right?
It's with a dot. So I'm going to do first, and I'm just going to give these some background colors so we can differentiate between each one on the page. We'll keep it simple. We'll do blue, red, and yellow. I know we're going to have some contrast issues. We're not too worried about the content at the moment. It's more just a demonstration on positioning. And you'll see what I mean. It's not going to be easy to read the text when we go yellow. And blue is going to be a little rough as well. Okay, so we'll double check that everything works. And there it is. I'm going to give these some dimensions as well, just so we can see this work a little bit. I'm going to give it a height. We'll say 50 pixels. And actually, I'm just going to apply this to all paragraph elements. And let's take a look at that. All right, so that's a lot taller now. That's nice. And I'm going to give them a width as well. We'll say 900 pixel, no, 500 pixels for the width.
Luis, can I stop you here for a bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, can you please open the reset.css file for me, the tab I mean? I want to see. So you just copy pasted everything from there, or can you please
Yeah, I even have the comment.
Okay, so I did the same thing, but it's not overriding. When I write "Hello World" and I give a font size of 100 pixels, it's showing me like quite big font over there. So I don't know what was happening with mine.
All right, so you have the reset.css file, and then in your link, you have reset above your styles.css.
Yeah, hold on. Let me double check it. Let me see. Yeah, it looks like the same. Let me see. You can continue. Let me see.
Okay, yeah, check for typos as well. That could, like, if you have missing a dot there, that would break it. And then in my styles, I also added this font size to my H1 to override the reset styles. I'm going to take a look at my paragraphs and see how they're looking dimension-wise. Okay, so they're spilling into each other a little bit because I set the sizes to be hard-coded, so it can't expand the height any further than 50 pixels, so it can't fit the text, so it is spilling down into these ones. So what I'm going to do is create a little bit more height so that it doesn't do that. And then I'm also going to add some margin to separate these a little bit. We'll do margin top 50 pixels. Okay, and I haven't actually started positioning anything yet. I'm just kind of getting a little bit of a template here to work with. And I'll give those a little bit of padding too, so things aren't pushed up against each other. There we go. So I have these three elements, and I'm going to move the positions around a little bit. So the first position I'm going to show you is the current position that they're in. By default, anytime you have an element on your page, the default positioning is static. So if I put position and I go to static, so the property is called position, the value is called static, and now I just applied this to first. But as I said, this is the default position. So when I look at the browser, nothing changes because it's already in a static position. And that just means that it's in the flow of the document. We haven't moved it anywhere yet. So this one's pretty straightforward. And you may need to use position static occasionally if you're toggling the positioning. So you could have a class that would say, we could call it toggle static. And then in here, you would just have position static. And then you could use a script to apply this class to one of your elements. And that's not something we're going to really get into the scope of today. But you could use a programming language like JavaScript to say, if this condition is met, then give it the position static class. And that'll happen behind the scenes whenever you just click a button. So again, that's not like in our scope, but I just wanted you to be aware that it does have a use, even though it doesn't look very useful at the moment. You could also use it to override other styles that you may have applied later. Maybe if you wanted to animate the positioning for some reason, that would be another time that you could switch it between like with a hover. If you remember from yesterday's lesson, we used a hover to change styles temporarily. Okay, so position static isn't all that interesting. Let's look at position relative. So position relative doesn't take it out of the flow of the document either. So when we look, we don't see any changes here. But what you can do with position relative is actually start moving this element around now. So we can say top, we'll say 100 pixels. And what that does is it'll move it from the top down 100 pixels. And notice that it's now overlapping with this other element. And we can't even see the text that's behind it because it's overlapping it so much. So it's still in the flow of the document. This element didn't slide up. The blue slid down. So the red element doesn't know that the blue element is no longer in its static position. It still thinks it's up here somewhere. If it did thought it moved, for example, if I take this top 100 off and I say margin top 100 pixels, it's going to force everything down. So this blue element just moved down 100 pixels, and I can prove that with the inspect tool here. You got that big yellow area at the top that's showing that we're pushing it down 100 pixels. And I'll also uncheck it over here. And we can see everything's moving up because it's in the flow of the document. But as soon as I apply the position top, you can see the red element is not moving with the blue element. It's actually really, I never noticed before when you comment out code that it shows up in the developer tools. That's really handy. Okay, so we see what position relative does. So there's another position that's kind of related to position relative, and it's called position absolute. It works the same way, except for the small difference that it removes it from the flow of the document. And it does it in relation to the first positioned parent that it finds. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So what I'm going to do here is say position. We'll go static at first. We'll change this back to static. And I'll remove this top, just so everything's kind of reset back to normal. And now I'm going to change this to absolute. And I'm not going to apply anything else yet. And it's gone. It's actually there. And this is another use case where you might want to check your dev tools, because if we look at the elements here, we can see it's right above my mouse. So if I highlight that, it's showing it right where second's at. They're saying they're in the same spot. What happened was it slid up and went underneath of it because it's no longer in the flow of the document. So what you can do here, I say top 100 pixels, and you can start moving it down now. We'll go 150, and we can see it's sliding down, but it's not in the flow of the document anymore. So these slid up. And let me move it down quite a bit so we can see that. So I have it way down here. Now I'm going to go back to this margin top, and I'm going to toggle this on and off. And we can see those are moving up and down, but the position absolute element down here is not affected at all by the rest of the document. So that margin isn't pushing this document. This can be really useful if you're trying to put something in a very specific location, but it can also throw you off when you start changing your screen sizes. If I could get this to slide up, I'll have to use mobile view. If I make this slide up, and now you can actually make things disappear off the page if you push things the wrong way. So you have to be careful with position absolute in that case. But it does go in reference to the top level positioned element. And let me explain that or show that. So currently we don't have anything set on positioning that's apparent. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to give this, I'll select this div. I don't need to give it an ID or anything. I'll select the div, and I'm going to call that position relative. So now this div is positioned, and I'm also going to give it a background color so we can see exactly where the div lives. We'll give it an aqua. Let's look at that. So the aqua div is now the positioned parent of the red element. So any of the positions that I push on the red are going to actually be positioned off of this aqua element instead of the body. And I'll show you that. Let me remove this top 550. And it's now, I believe, under the blue. No, it's still under the red. So I will push it, we'll put bottom 50 pixels. This will push it in the other direction. Because I moved it, it actually brings it to the front as well. But now we're positioning it based off of this element. And what I mean is the bottom of the red element is 50 pixels above the bottom border of this blue or this aqua element. So that is the relative positioning. Sorry, the absolute position is relative to the first positioned element. And I'll show you the documentation if my explanation doesn't seem that clear. Just maybe that'll help clear it up a bit. And I'll show another example. I'll move the position relative to the body now instead. So position relative on the body, and I'm going to put the aqua on the body as well. So the aqua is now the first positioned element that it can find. So that's where it's going to get its reference from. And it doesn't look like it moves, so it must be considering that div positioned. Let me actually inspect that div. It doesn't show that it is positioned. Make sure I didn't make any typos or anything. So the body is set to relative. Let me remove this static positioning. Interesting. For some reason, it's actually still applying it to the parent element rather than the body. It must be considering that as a positioned element. Let me actually add another div here, or I'll add we have this main. I'm going to put the positioning on the main. And I apologize, this isn't going as expected. This happens. This is one of the pieces of coding here. So we are 50 pixels above that main. Let me set the height of the main now to be 100 VH. So VH is a unit that we haven't seen yet. This stands for view height. So it's going to be based off of my screen height. And there we go. It's working as expected now. So now we're 50 pixels above the bottom of the page. I'm guessing that didn't work because I put the relative positioning on the body and it just didn't, it doesn't play well with that element in particular. But it seems to be working fine with the main. So in the case where you need to have your position to be relative to a parent, you may have to put a wrapper in here. So that could be a div. It could be your main. And what I mean is if the body ain't playing well, you could always take a div like this and put it all the way around everything so that everything's wrapped inside of this div now. And then I'm going to give this an ID and I'll call it wrapper. You can call these whatever you want. I'm just making it clear why I did this way. And with wrapper, I can go to my styles. And if I didn't want to do this to my main, maybe I had specific styles already on my main, then I could do the same thing to wrapper and I should have the same results. And I do. This way I don't affect my main styles. We can see my main is now smaller again. It's up here. You can see the edge of that. But my wrapper element goes the whole way down the page. And I apologize for that little hiccup there. I didn't expect the body to not play well with the position relative. But those kind of things happen. And that's why you just have to keep working with your dev tools and try to figure out what went wrong whenever things don't go as expected. Okay, so position absolute. Does anyone have any questions about position absolute or position relative? Any of the manipulation I've been doing here so far? Am I going too fast with this? Any questions at all?
How do you take a screenshot?
A screenshot?
Yeah, I was trying to control C.
Are you on Windows?
Yes.
Try pressing your Windows key, Shift, and then S.
Window keys, and F.
S. Shift
S.
S. Windows
Okay, I'll try that.
Shift S. It's 3 buttons.
Windows Shift S. Okay, I'll try that.
Okay. And if that doesn't work on your keyboard, there should be a button that says like PRTSC or print screen.
Yeah,
Something along
I
those lines.
used to use the print screen, and that would do it, but it didn't. It didn't do it. So
Okay. Did the Windows Shift S work for you?
the what?
Windows Shift S, did that take the screenshot for you?
I'm fixing to find out.
Okay.
So I just got to pull something up.
Yeah, that might open your Windows snipping tool, which allows you to select a
Do
certain
y'all
area.
use Snip? Do y'all use Snippet?
Was that, sorry, what was that?
Y'all use Snippet?
I use the Windows snipper. If I
Right.
hit the S, I don't know if you can see this right here, but I get like this little window that pops up, and then it allows me to take a screenshot on a rectangle, window, full screen, or freeform. And then I can select the area that I want to screenshot.
Just wanna just grab any old thing. All right, let's see. Hmm.
And one thing too, everything I'm showing you here is available on MDM. Let me show you that real quick too. I believe I had that page open earlier. So here's the MDM documentation on this, and it will show you pretty much everything I just showed you so far. There's a couple more a couple more here to go over. Static, if we go down to look at what it says about static, this is the normal flow of the document. Relative, normal flow of the document, but the ability to offset it.
Mhm.
And then we have absolute. It's removed from the normal flow, as I showed with the margin moving it up and down. And no space is created for the element in the page layout. And the element is positioned relative to its closest position ancestor, if any. And this is what I was referring to when I said you might have to create a wrapper and position the wrapper to relative in order to get this to respond the way you expect it to. Let's get into fixed now. The fixed positioning is pretty cool. You'll see this quite a bit with nav bars. I'll put it on my first element since it's closest to the top. So we'll do position, and it always gives relative as an autocomplete for some reason. We're going to do fixed, and I'm going to have to create some more space. So on my third element, I'm going to give this a height of 5,000 pixels, something dramatic. And let's take a look at, we crashed. There we go. Now, when I scroll down, watch what happens here. The blue is moving with me. It's always in the same spot on my screen no matter what. And it kind of goes underneath the red there. This is one of those problems. Like if you needed this to be on top, you might have to play with the Z index a bit. Sometimes these positions, they don't play well. So if I look at, I believe that's the first one. I'm going to try assigning this a Z index of 10. And yes, that brings it to the front. By default, I believe Z index is set to 1 or 0. I forget which it is. But all you have to do is make it larger than the other elements. So this allows you to stack elements on top of each other. So I could set this to 10,000 if I wanted to, and it'll work the same. I could set it to -5, and it will go behind everything. So now it's behind the yellow element, so you can't see it. And I'm going to bring that back up. I could even set this to 2, and it should bring it out in front. So as long as it has a higher Z index than the other elements, if I set this to 1, this will tell me if it defaults. It does default to 0 because this brought it to the front. Okay, Does anyone have any questions about fixed? And I'll show again too where this could be useful. I'll actually make a quick little nav bar. We'll set the width here to 100%. Missing a colon. And then we'll set top to 0. That'll move this to the top of the page since it's in position fixed. And we have a little bit of space there, so we might have to go a little bit negative with that. We could say negative, it looks like about 60 pixels to me. So we'll try that. And there it slides it up to the top. And now we have like our little floating nav bar that follows us down the screen. But one thing to keep in mind, this is not in the flow of the document. So you need to have another element taking that space up at the top of the document. Otherwise, everything here can slide up and disappear because there's nothing pushing this down. One way you could do that as well, we currently have this set to 50 pixels from the bottom. Let me remove that. And when that brings it up to the top, I'm going to take this out of position absolute. And it actually doesn't look bad where it's at, but I believe my H1 is gone right now. So for the H1, I'm going to say margin top, and I have 70 pixels from the top, so I'll say 70 pixels margin top. And it brought it down some, but it wasn't enough. So let's do 170. And that was a little bit too much because we have this empty space here. So we'll say 150, 120, and you just got to play with it until you find what you like. And then as you scroll now, it looks a little bit better. So we have our fixed position at the top, and then we have the H1 right here. Okay, so the next one I want to show you is sticky. And it's similar. It has a similar use case to fixed. You'll see this quite a bit with nav bars as well. So I'm going to put that on the third element. Position, sticky. So what will happen is as I'm scrolling down, it's moving up still. But when it reaches the top of the page, which this was a terrible demonstration because you can't even see it moving now. I need to add more content to it. Let's say lorem. I can't spell lorem today. Times 3. We'll add some more content so we can actually see that responding now. Still wasn't enough. I'll change the font size. Styles. And this is just so we can see the content within the element as I scroll down. And we'll do 25 pixels. And it doesn't seem to be responding in time. So I'm actually going to move this to the first element again. And I apologize for this little hiccup as well. And because this slid down, we can now see that's actually working. It's not quite where I want it to be, but we can see as I scroll, when I reach this point, it stays with me and keeps on coming. So what I could do now is bring this down. We're at negative 60 pixels. That's probably why it's up so high. I'm going to set this back to 0. And there it is. As I scroll down, it grabs it and brings it with me. So does that make sense, how that sticky works and how that's related to fixed? They're very similar. There's use cases for all of them. Sometimes I see this on blogs as well. They'll have the heading move in the article that you're currently reading so that you know which part that you're reading. And then when you get past a certain point, they'll actually remove the sticky class by using a little bit of JavaScript. It'll remove that class as you scroll down, and then it'll grab the next sticky element. You could also use Z-index to solve that if you didn't have access to JavaScript yet. With Z-index, you would just make sure that the next element in line is going to be on top. So in this case, second, we'll say Z-index. We'll give this a Z-index of 2, and we'll give this a position of sticky. And I'm going to say top will be 0, and a semicolon. So as I scroll down, The red comes on top, and now the red is coming with me as well. And if this red was the full width, the blue would look like it disappeared. And then as I scroll back up, the red will get dropped off, the blue gets dropped off as we go. So you could use this kind of like a table of contents type thing, so you can see what section of the page you're on. There's a lot of different use cases for it. Another use case I see sometimes is they have a little button at the bottom right of the page that'll say back to top. And when you click it, it actually takes you back to the top of the page. And that's actually a pretty easy thing to implement. I'll actually do that real quick. So if in my page, if I put a footer, and I'm just doing this for semantics, I'm going to create I'll do this as a div, just so I can add some extra stuff here. Let's try that again. And this will have a class of BTT, and that'll stand for back to top. And in here, I'll write back to top. Or I could even get like a up arrow emoji. You can actually paste emojis in here. If you have a copy paste version of it, you could put a up arrow. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. So let's see what that looks like at the moment. It should just be some plain text somewhere on the page near the bottom. I think my other positions are interfering with it, but that's okay. I'll bring that out front with some styling. So we'll do back to top, and we'll give this a height of 50 pixels, a width of 50 pixels, and I got to put my semicolons in or I'll get those errors. And we'll give this a background color. We'll give this something unique. We'll give it a black background color. We'll give it a text color of white so that actually has some contrast to it. And I'm going to give it a border radius of 1000%. And the reason I'm using 1000% is because this will make it perfectly round. I got to make sure I put radius there. I could also put just like 5000 px, and it'll kind of look perfectly round until you change your screen size, and then it could turn it into an oval. But with percentages, for some reason, it's just always a perfect circle. So now we need to find that. Let me give it a z index of 10. Not sure where it's at yet. We'll give it a position of absolute. Sorry, we've got to give it a position of fixed, not absolute, because we want it to scroll with us. And bottom would be 0. And here it is. So now that's showing up. It's not the prettiest. Let's give this 150 by 150. It'll be a little larger than normal. That's okay. And then we want to text align center. I don't have really an easy way to bring the text down. So what I could do for that is padding top until we get into Flexbox, that is. And I'll just do like 75 pixels. That kind of threw it into an oval. That's good enough for now, though, just to give you an idea of how this will work. Because I'm using padding, we'll make these 75 and 75. All right, good enough. I want to have Flexbox. I'll show you an easier way where this will be a lot easier to figure out and have it just be a perfect circle. So next we need to have an anchor tag in here. And this back to top should be inside of the anchor tag. And then all we got to do is put a hashtag. And it takes me back to the top. So that's what the hashtag does inside of the link. It just takes you back to the root of the page. And we'll actually move this over to the right. Say right 10 pixels, bottom 10 pixels. That way it's not all the way at the bottom. There we go. We got our little back to top. Anyone have any questions about how I did that? No questions? Okay.
Are we going to set our folders the same way you do?
When you say folders, do you mean with an index, a
Yeah.
reset, and a styles?
Uh-huh.
The reset is optional. It's just
Uh-huh.
something I advise using because it makes things easier. But you definitely need an index and a styles at minimum. And then
Is
you
there a
may
template? Is there a template somewhere that goes 1, 2, 3? How you do these things? Like a template somewhere?
a template for how to create the files.
Yes. How to how to how to code. Like what do you need to start with first and so forth. Or is there
This kind
no
of
rhyme
is
or
the
reason?
template. So like your previous assignments are, they should all look the same for the most part. You can reference those until you start to get this memorized. The index.html. So there's 3 things you always need. That's probably why there isn't anything. You could technically build one, but it'd take longer to download your template every time than it would just to create the 3 files. And I'll just do a quick demonstration on that. I'm going to create a new folder here. This would be the empty folder. We'll just ignore these 3 for now. And what I'm going to do is inside of here, I'm going to create an index.html. I'm going to create a styles.css. And then in my index.html, I'm going to do my exclamation point, press tab. And then in the head, I'm going to press link, click CSS, and make this plural. And that's all there is to setting it up.
Okay.
And then if you wanted to reset, then you have to Google search the reset. And right here is the actual link. So let me just show you that real quick. You just hit reset CSS in Google, and the top link is right here. So you scroll down, you have this code block, and you just copy and paste this into that file. So I'll copy this, highlight it, Control C to copy. And then I'll create another new file in here, reset.css. So now I have 2 files. I have a styles.css and a reset.css. In my reset.css, I'm going to paste, and the reset is complete. I just need to link it in. The link, CSS, reset. If you were going to create a template, you could create these 3 files. You could even put some predefined CSS in here if you wanted to, stuff that you use every single time. For example, if your H1s are always going to be 50 pixels, you could say font size 50 pixels, and then you could save this file somewhere so that you can reuse it in the future. Maybe you could probably build your own template that way.
Okay.
You just create this right here, this little shell, and then zip it somewhere on your machine. And then every time you need it, just copy that zip file and extract it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could make your own template that way. And when we get into JavaScript, that's another file that you'll have to create. So there'll be a total of 4 files if you're using a reset. But it doesn't have any real setup whenever you create those as well. Is this like seeming a little bit overwhelming because of how many files I currently have here? Is that what's your question was regarding?
Yeah, like I said, I'm behind. I haven't gotten any of my assignments done because I was sick for 3 days, big time. And so I've been trying to read, and then some of the videos were crossing over, like you could hear 2 people talking over one another. Something was weird about that. And so I've been trying to, and then the TA asked me, he's like, does the teacher know? I'm like, well, yeah, I told him I'm behind. I'm like, I have a learning disability, and I take a little longer than some do, but once I get it, and I run with it. But I am, I am definitely behind trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and that happens. If falling behind on the assignments,
Yeah.
that's definitely a challenge to overcome there.
Catch back
So
up.
yeah, my best advice would be is to follow along the best you can with the current assignment.
Mhm.
And then whenever you have extra time or you're with the TAs,
Mhm.
At that time, work on the previous assignments. But
Yeah.
like during the workshop, try to work on the current assignment. That way you're still learning the new content and you're not playing catch up the whole time. Because
Yeah.
I do iterate over a lot of the content from the previous lectures again as I continue. But also, don't be afraid to stop me and ask questions too as we're working.
I know. I just don't want to slow everybody else down in there because there's a lot of people that have done this and they seem to understand. So I've never even seen coding before. So
Don't feel bad. I barely understand too.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
and
like, I'm still looking at once and I got to get a second screen because I can't listen to his video and practice on the same. So I'm gonna get another screen so that'll make that easier for me. But
that can definitely make a big difference too.
oh yeah, yeah. And then I try to remember shortcuts and stuff, but it's been 3 years since I even been into a computer because I've been taking care of my 91-year-old elderly mom. So I want to do this. I'm just hoping I'm smart enough to do it.
It's not about how smart you are. It's about the commitment to learning it. That's the biggest thing is just learn a little bit each day and eventually you'll be working in this industry, guaranteed.
Yeah, if it's an organized thing, then I'll definitely be up for that. So I like things organized and I like lines looking the same and centered and
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of having like the formatter and whatnot too, because this can get pretty messy if you're not formatting everything. Let me get back into our selectors now. So I went over all of the positions. Does anyone have any questions about any of these positions? Let me actually show the documentation here for the different types. So we went over static, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. And there they are there. Any questions at all about any of those? I understand this absolute positioning can be a little weird, a little weird concept to grasp, but this documentation here is awesome. It's kind of showing you how this works. If I click on this, you can see that it took it out of the flow of the document because this one was on the right, this square here, and it slid it over to the left to get out of the way for this. So if I go back to static, you can see that move back. So absolute, this just puts it right on top. And the reason it's moving it up and over a little bit is because it's saying top 40 pixels, left 40 pixels here. So it's going to move it up and over just a little bit. And then we go back to static and absolute. And then with the relative, we can see it's leaving that space open because it thinks the element is still in that spot. So hopefully if you do have any confusion relating to the positioning, this right here can help clear it up. Also, I think the best way to really understand it is to try to build something with it. Try to build a navigation menu, try to build that little back to top button. And again, I'll show you a better way to make that round, whatever, so that it doesn't look huge like this and ugly. I didn't want to dive into too many new properties just yet. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about some more advanced selectors. And the first one I'm going to show you is one that we've seen already. So hopefully this is just a little bit of review. When I do an inspect, and I'm going to try this again, this failed for me last time. If I hit H1 and I go to copy and I copy selector, and now I should be able to paste in there. It's actually working this time. It gives me the most specific selector. And the one I want to show you is this greater than sign. Does anyone remember what this is? The greater than sign right here. So this selector is the direct sibling, the direct child, which means it's going to look in the main element and it's going to find an H1 that is a direct child of main. So if I go in here, we can look at main, and we can look at its children. It has two children, an H1 and a div. And we can see that the H1 is the direct child of main. Now, if I go back into my HTML and I put this inside of a div, it is no longer the direct child of main. It is now main is an ancestor of H1, but it's not a direct child. Instead, the div is the direct child. So if I collapse that and I collapse this, we can see we have two children here. And the first div and the second div are the direct children of main, but the H1 is the direct child of this div. So in my styles, this selector won't select anything unless I add in div in H1. Now there's another version of this that's similar, where you can grab the child of an element, and that would be if you were to just put a space. So if I say main space H1, it'll look for any children of the main that is in H1, and it will select that. So this is a similar way to do it, and you'll see this quite a bit as well. That way, if you did happen to wrap your H1 in a div, maybe you needed to move some things around using Flexbox later. We'll get into creating wrappers. But you may have created a div around your H1 at some point, and now all of a sudden, if you had a bunch of styles in here, let's say we had a background color of blue, that background color is not going to be applied. So we'll take a look at that. And there it is right here. It has the aqua background right now. It does not have the blue background. So if I remove this direct child, we get the blue background. It did work. But if I put this back in and I put the div, now we can grab the direct child of the div, which is the H1, and we can see we still get that blue background. So does anyone have any questions about the direct child selector? And I think this will make more sense once you start using it. It's a little abstract at the moment. I'm just doing these demos, and it's kind of hard to understand until you actually have to think about, how do I get to my H1? How do I select that? And you might not want to create a class, especially whenever you get to the point where you're generating your HTML using JavaScript and you're not actually writing any HTML. And that's a more advanced thing I don't want to dive into, but there are times where you don't have access to a class or an ID. You have multiple elements that are the same. So you'll need to start leveraging these. And one way to find out a way to get to something, again, is just right click on it, inspect, go to the element, right click on it, go to copy, and hit copy selector. And that can give you a way to get to that element. So there we see wrapper, main, div, and we get this little pseudo selector here. It's saying, look for the div and grab the first child of the div. That's what nth child means. It says, whatever number child I put in here, grab it. So nth, if I wanted to grab, let's say I had a paragraph in there as well, I could say, grab the second child of the div, grab the third child of the div. So that's another advanced selector that we'll get into a little bit later. But you could just do that as well. Yes, Ryan.
Could you grab multiple with that? Like if you did nth child 3, 4.
I'm not sure if 3, 4 works, but you can do odd and even, and it will grab the odd and even elements. But normally when you need to grab more than one, what you would do is you'd say div nth child 2, and let me remove this part here and this part here just to make this part clear. And then you'd put a comma, and you could do div nth child 3, comma nth child 4. Now you can grab multiple elements like that by comma separating them. And if we look at our reset file again, we can see all of these selectors are comma separated. So it just grabs every single element and then it applies these styles. So it's similar to that. And we're grabbing multiple elements.
You can do essentially the same thing, just wouldn't be able to do it inside the parentheses. You'd have to like write.
I'll check the documentation just to make sure. I don't believe so. I've never tried it. It does look like it has some power here. to do that. Nth minus n. So this is a really advanced selector, and it's not one that I use all that often outside of just grabbing a specific element or doing odds and evens. So I don't know every single attribute that is available to it, but it does look like you can do a lot of stuff here. So this is, what is the negative? I don't even know what the negative n means. I'd have to read this documentation a lot more in depth. It looks like you can do a lot of cool stuff though.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for looking.
Yeah. I would say read this on your own if you're interested, because right here represents the first three elements. So you would do minus n plus 3. So it doesn't look like it's comma separated. It's a little different than that. This isn't something I've ever tried, just because I would do what I just showed you here. I just comma separate them to make it easier for me to understand what's happening. I don't know if that's the right answer. It probably would be better to learn that more in depth, but there's so many tools in CSS to learn. It's not something that's feasible to learn every single thing. But if you're really interested in that, absolutely have at it. There's some other nth selectors as well you can look at. But before I get too much off track here, I want to get into the next selector. It's similar to the direct child, but this one's going to be a sibling selector. Let me just put a plus sign in here. I believe it's just called sibling. I'll have to search for it. Adjacent sibling selector, I think it's called. There we go. It's in my autocomplete. Next sibling selector. Here we go. This is the one, the plus sign. And what this will do is it grabs the element that's immediately after the plus sign. So in this example here, they have an image element and they have a paragraph element. This will select the paragraph and only the paragraph that immediately follows an image. So I can show an example of that. We got a little bit of messy stuff going on in here. Let me clean this up a bit. Delete this div, delete this div. Okay, so I'm going to create another element here just to add something in. I'm going to do a section. I'll put a paragraph in it and I'll just say hello. And I'm not actually going to select the section. I'm going to select this element here using the sibling selector. So this paragraph is a sibling to this section. We can see they're side by side. The indentations line up. So that's telling me they're siblings, and we want to grab that one. And I'm not going to use the class name. I'll use the sibling selector. So I would type section plus P. And now I'm grabbing the second paragraph because it immediately follows the section. And I will prove that by doing the scale and setting it to 3. And we can see that that's now big in comparison to the rest of them. And the reason I didn't do the background color, does anyone know why I couldn't do background color? I'll actually show that real quick. I have to change it to black, and it doesn't work. But we can see the scale works. So why isn't the background color working? And it's okay if you don't see it. This is a little bit of, I think I talked about this for one day. This is going back to I can't say it right now, the specificity. If we look at the specificity of the section plus P, it's 2. And my background color with second is 10. So this one's going to win, and the background's always going to be red when I'm using the selector. So this one's more specific, so it wins. So hopefully that's a little bit of review on the specificity. And then if I needed this to actually turn blue, I would have to get more specific than that. I'd have to use some sort of ID. I could put in .second like this, and then it will select the P tag that has a class of second. And now we get that black background. And if we look at the specificity, we're 12. So this one's going to win. And also we're down lower than this one, so that'll also help it win. And the last one I want to show is the general sibling selector. It works similarly to the plus sign, but it doesn't have to be immediately following. So, and that's the tilde. If you don't know where the tilde is on your keyboard, it's right above the tab key beside number 1. So that's the tilde, and it's the general sibling selector. And we can see now that everything got scaled up. That's a basic sibling to this section. Well, this first paragraph won't get selected because it has to be after the first element. So this paragraph will get selected and this paragraph will get selected. Sorry that wasn't clear when I said that the first time. But yes, it has to be after your first selector. So section, general selector, p tag, and then that'll select all the paragraphs after the section. Any questions about that? And we're going to get some practice with this. I want to take the 10-minute break, but I'm going to take one more minute here just to show you a way that you can practice your selectors. And this is actually going to be in today's assignment, so this wouldn't hurt to look into. And let me see if I can reset this. I'll open it up in a incognito tab. So flukeout.github.io. And I have the link inside of today's assignment. I'm going to put it in the chat as well. And I'll also throw it into Slack whenever I go over the assignment today. So what this does is it creates these elements over here on the right. We have a div, and then we have a plate element and another plate element. Now in HTML, plate elements aren't real, but it is representing an element that could be real. So what you have to do is type in the CSS selector to select whatever element is moving on the table. In this case, it's the plate. So I'm going to type in plate, and it's selected the plate. I don't have to put in the curly brackets because they're already here. And then it says styles would go here. It's explaining how that would work. So in this case, if I wanted to select the bento elements, what would I type in to select just the bentos? And if this is a little confusing, keep in mind, you could think of this like the bentos are like a section, the plate is like a paragraph element. They're just using words to represent elements. They're not actual elements, but you would still select them the same way as if they were actual elements, if that makes sense.
You would just type in bento and it would select the...
Yep, just type in bento and it selects that. And then here, we want to select just the fancy plate. That's the only one that's moving. So what would I need to do to select that?
dot fancy. Or no, I'm sorry, pound sign fancy.
Pound sign fancy, and it selects it, exactly. So you just work through these. The assignment today is to get up to level 16 and then take a screenshot of that. Get done what you can with that. I'll go, and if you have any questions about it, if you're stuck at any point, just reach out and ask. Also, this over here is really helpful. This explains how this works. Now, it's showing this with spans. So it's referring to maybe this div as a span or this bento as a span. It doesn't really matter what element they put here. Just think of these elements as placeholders for these elements, if that helps. And this is the descendant selector. And I showed this one a little bit ago. This is where you just have two selectors with a space in between them instead of the direct sibling. So if I said plate and I put in the direct sibling, it would be plate apple. And I believe that would actually give me credit for this one. Let me try it. Yeah, it did. I'll go back to that. That wasn't what it wanted me to do. If we look at the descendant selector here, it still gave me the check mark though. So as long as you get the selection, you're good. It wants me to use a descendant selector that's not a direct descendant. So that would be bento space plate. Sorry, that would be plate space apple, because this apple is nested inside of this plate element. Does anyone have any questions about this little game here? Let me press enter, just make sure that works. Yep. Okay, no questions. Let's take our 10-minute break. And when we get back, we'll start touching on layouts and I believe some Flexbox too. Let me my notes back up. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit of Flexbox in the next hour. So let's get into our 10-minute break. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So let's talk about the display property. This is something I've brought up a few times, but I haven't really gone under the hood yet. Does anyone remember what we did with display? There was 2 properties we changed. Three if you count the stretch goals. So I'll bring it up on MDM. So maybe this is looking a little bit familiar now. We have display block. We have display inline block, display none, display flex, and display grid. The main ones that I want to cover right now are block, inline block, and none. And when I showed this before, this blue area, this blue border, let me zoom in if I can. This it's kind of hard on the eyes. That blue little border there would represent the actual element spanning across the entire page. And when we switch this to inline block, it no longer spans the entire page. It only takes up the amount of space needed for its content. So it's still a block element, but it's inline, which means another element could stay beside it now if it had enough space for it. And display none is kind of self-explanatory. It just gets rid of the element. But what it does, it doesn't just get rid of it. It actually removes it from the flow of the document as well. So let me show these in action. I'm going to use let me simplify this a little bit. I'm actually going to remove this BTT thing. Get rid of this really large height. We'll make these relative again. And this one will be a width of 500 px like the rest. So we shouldn't need that anymore. Actually remove that completely because it's up here. Position relative, we'll remove those as well. So we're just back to the basic background colors for these. So let's take a look at that and make sure everything looks normal. We still have a little bit of extra content there. Let me fix that. This is the wrong page. Okay. And we have that little bit of extra text there for that section. But beyond that, everything looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is, let me delete that section just so it's not taking up space. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the, let me see what their parent element is. So we have display block and we have display inline block. So I want to put display inline block on this div right here. Since it's wrapping all of the paragraph elements. Can someone tell me how to select this div without selecting this div?
Well, don't you just
Repeat.
click on it?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You click on it, or is it, I'm missing something?
I mean, select it with CSS. What selector would I use to select this div if I don't want to add an ID or class to it? And not select this div, only this one.
I think you could use the main and then the greater sign div, and that would select it.
Yes, that would be the direct child selector. So let me put that up here. It'd be div, greater sign. I think I just did that backwards. Main, greater sign, div. That just threw me way off there. And I got to put my code block in there before I format. There we go. Okay, so I'm now selecting that div. And what I'm going to do is say display inline block. And let's see what happens to that div. I'm going to do an inspect on it, and I would expect it to be as wide as the content that's in it. So here's the div, and you can see the width of that is as wide as the p tags or the p elements. We don't have a lot of space here to work, but luckily with this tool, I could set this to 50% and expand this way out. So now we're on a really wide monitor. I know this is going to be hard to read the content, but we can just look at the colors to get an idea of what's happening here. So with inline block, that div is only using as much space as needed. So let's also apply that to each of these classes. And I can actually speed that up just by putting it on the paragraph element. That'll put it to all three at the same time. Does everyone understand why? I'll show real quick just in case. So if I look at my index, the three classes are on each paragraph element. So instead of repeating the display inline block on each class, I just selected my paragraph element, which I only have these three paragraph elements, and I was able to apply the style to all three at the same time. What I do want to do though is change this width to be 200 pixels, just so we have a little bit more room to work with. And let's take a look at what this looks like now. So each of these are inline block. They're still block elements, but they're only taking up as much space as needed. You can see the height there. They're starting to spill out a little bit. That's just because I crushed them down a little more and I didn't give them any more height. I'll fix that real quick. We'll change the height to 170. That should fix it. There we go. But you can see these are right up against each other. Let me close these. Yeah, we still have room. So they're right up against each other, except for a little bit of space there. Let's see what that space is. Close this tool. And looking over here, I can see we have this padding. And remember, the padding is on the inside of the border, so that's not what it is. And it doesn't appear that there's anything that would actually be creating that. So this is called border box. And let me bring that up on the documentation. I'm zoomed way in. Border box. Let me just do a Google search for it. So this is the box sizing. I was giving you the property name instead of the actual, sorry, the value name instead of the property name. So you'd have to set it to border box to fix that. So box sizing border box. And I'm actually surprised that's not in the CSS reset. That's normally something that gets reset to prevent that from happening. So if I say border sizing border box, it's on the wrong element, I think. And also we lost our height. I'll come back to that. We'll actually come back to that and fix that in a little bit. For now, I want to focus more on this display property. So with the display property, each of these are set to inline blocks, so they're all next to each other. The other display property to see here is just display block, and that's the default setting for a div, a p element, for a lot of different elements. Some that are set to inline by default would be an anchor tag, the span, the strong element. All of those are inline elements, and they don't take up the full width. But by default, a div, p tag, all those are block elements. So if I switch these back to this one here, I'm actually just going to remove this completely because that's actually just extra for now. And now we can see they're back on their own lines. And when I do the inspect of the paragraph, it's taking up 100% of its container. At least it should be. Oh, the width. Sorry, I have a width set to 200 pixels. So if I remove that, it's now taking up 100% of its container. And if I set these back to inline, we can see they go back to being next to each other. Even though the width is, but the width is actually going to interfere with that a little bit. But you can see when I have the width, they're next to each other. So it gives you kind of the general idea of where you could use this display. Like in a nav element, you can use it to put your links. If you have LIs, you could put them on the same line. But now I want to show you how to use Flexbox to do that. And when we look in here, we can see display flex. It pushed everything over to the left, but it put everything in the same spot. But it's still keeping this across the whole page. So one thing we'll keep in mind when you're doing layouts is everything is in a box. And when you're using display flex, it's going to put everything into either a row or a column based on the properties. And let me show you what that looks like here. We'll just say display flex. And we'll refresh. It seems like we don't have enough space. Where did oh, I put it on the wrong element. Sorry. This should be on the div that wraps them. So we'll do main div display flex. And this display flex property always goes on the parents. And I'm going to actually open up a Figma, and I'll draw this out and show you why it has to be like that. But here now they're all next to each other, and we actually did get rid of that empty space there. So that must have been part of the, I thought that was part of the border box. That must have been part of the actual display settings. That's something I'm going to have to look into to see why we had that empty space there, because that was actually unexpected. But with this, everything is in a row and everything is pushed to the left. Now, when I look at this div here, you can see the word flex in my DevTools. Let me zoom in on that. I'll drag this down just a little bit. So we can see that this is a flex container because this is a containing these items, and it has the word flex there. That's indicating in our developer tools that it's a flex container. But if you look, this flex container goes the whole way across the page. Flex containers are still block elements, but everything is justified to the left. And when I say justify, I want you to think of like Word, like a word processor. When you justify your content to the left when in there, it pushes all your text to wherever you say the justification to be. Flexbox works the same way, and it actually has a similar property name. So let me open up Figma here. And what I want to do is draw how this works, just to make it a lot more clear. So I'm going to start with a section, actually. So this is going to be our flex container. So we're just going to write flex container. This is kind of like that div that we've seen. And whenever we have content, I'm going to use triangles to represent content. So I got to go this. There's a piece of content, and then here's another one and another one. So we have 3 pieces of content in here, and I actually created a 4th one. I'm going to do that. So this would be if I just said display flex. This is what we'll get, and I'm going to write that above this. Try that again. When I write display flex in my CSS, this is what we get. And I'm writing this on the container, not on the elements. This would be my paragraph elements, whatever content is in the container. So what it's doing is it's putting everything justified to the left, and it'll actually be tight to the left whenever it does it. And the reason it's going to the left is because it's doing what it's called putting it at the start of the flex item. And let me draw out this. We're going to put an arrow here. This is going to be the main axis of our flex container whenever you say display flex. So everything that you do is going to be based on this axis. So if I say justify content flex start, which is the default for Flexbox, I'll show that with the code here. Keep in mind, you can only use justify content on a flex container. So if you try to do this property without saying display flex first, it won't actually do anything. So display flex, justify content, flex start. When I look at my demo, let me get this into the same browser. There we go. When I look at my demo, nothing changed because it's already on flex start by default. So nothing unexpected there. But what I could do is change my display, and I'm going to write that above it here. Sorry, justify content. Justify content. We're currently in flex start, but I can switch this to, say, space between. And what that's going to do is it's going to take all available space, and it's going to take this element, and it's going to push it all the way to the right along the main axis. That's important to remember that it's pushing it along the main axis. And it's going to take extra space, and it's going to put that right in the center. So that's going to be all the way to the right. That one's going to be all the way to the left, and this one's going to be in the center. And I'll demonstrate that in here. So instead of flex start, we're going to say space between. And let me go to the demo, and we can see exactly what I said. And I'm actually going to close the dev tools so that we can see these move. So we have this one all the way to the left, this one's all the way to the right, and this one's directly in the center. Now, I don't know if you've seen it. Whenever I popped open my autocomplete, we also had something called space around. So space around works very similarly to space between, but it will also evenly space these elements like that, so that there's equal space, and it'll actually be, I'm not sure if I can actually get it lined up perfectly, but you'll have equal space between here and here and here and here. So everything is spaced evenly with all available space. So let me show that in code now. Space around. And we'll look at the demo, and there we see that empty space, that empty space, that empty space. Now, this one, I told you that this was going to be even between here, 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 and here. Can anyone take a guess at why this looks like it's further apart from here to here than it is to the edges?
Because it counts the space from the two side elements, like from that element to the edge, it adds that together. That's my
Yeah,
guess.
exactly. So this one here has some space and it stops here. This one has some space and it stops there. So it's a little misleading in my drawing. This should be more like this, because it takes this space and it, I'll actually just draw a line there real quick to show. So this is the space that belongs to this element right here. And this is the space that belongs to this element. So it's actually going to take even amount of space, and it's going to push it against each other. So it won't be perfect for that. And that's where you could use some margin left and margin right if you needed to bring these in so that they are perfectly even. So it's not a perfect solution for every situation, but it's still very powerful to do it like that. All right, so flex end is pretty straightforward what that's going to do. It's going to move everything to the end of the main axis. So I keep bringing up this main axis, and I keep saying it's important. And that's because we have another property, and that's called flex direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to see if I can just copy all of this and paste it here and rotate it. So everything's going to be sideways. And it will look something like that when you go to column. So display flex, flex direction, column. So notice that the main axis is now pointing down. So by default, if I didn't change these to flex end, all of these are going to end up here. I know we can't see that container very well, so let me just draw another one here real quick. We'll get rid of this line. And this is going to be flex column. And I'll show this in a second. But notice my main axis is now vertical. That's really important because now my justify content is no longer moving things left and right. It's moving things up and down. And that can be really confusing if you're trying to manipulate things to the center or maneuver things around. And where this comes really handy though, is because I know that I can move everything down and over, I can nest flex containers. And I'm going to show you a drawing of what that could look like. So I'm going to create, this would be my HTML page. This is going to be my body. So there's my body element, and I'm just going to put each section underneath so that we can see what's nested in what. So that's the body. Inside the body, I'm going to have a header. We'll have it by itself. And the header is not going to take up full width though. The header's only going to go up to here. So there's the header. And I'm going to put a main. I'll have the main go to here. And then I'll have a footer. So if I were to put display flex on my body, does anyone know what would happen? I have 3 children in the body.
They would move, instead of being on top of each other, they would move side by side.
Exactly. So this one was going to go to the middle. The header would end up on the left, and it's going to take up the full height of its content. And then the footer is going to be on the right. So if I put that on my body, we're going to have something that looks something like this. Let me bring that down just a little bit. So these are nested inside of the body. The body set the display flex. Now we have this going on. How could I solve this? How could I fix this? Assuming I'm going to use Flexbox for this layout.
You could set the main to take up 100% of the space inside the container, so that it would be even with the header and the footer.
I see what you're saying, and that would technically work.
I don't know if that was what you're looking for.
No, I'll actually. I'm going to do this in code real quick just to show. Let me look at my HTML and see if I have this similar setup. I'll just do this real quick. We'll get rid of this div. Deleted my paragraph closer. So we have a main. I'll just do this manually. We'll get rid of this wrapper because I'm going to do this exactly like I'm showing it in the drawing. So we're going to have a header. And I'll just color these. I'll give them a background color and give them some sizes so that we can see what this looks like. And then we have a footer. Okay, so in my styles, I'm going to create a new style sheet for this so I don't lose all of that. I'm going to call this flexdemo.css. And with CSS, it's similar to HTML. Your first style sheet, it's usually called styles. After that, you can call them whatever you want. Similar to how index is always your first HTML, your first CSS is usually styles. It's not a requirement, it's just something that people do. So instead of taking in styles.css, now I'm going to take in flexdemo, just so I don't lose my code there. Okay, so I want to give my body display flex, just like I did on my drawing. And I'm going to give the header a background color of blue. The main will have a background color of red. And we'll use green this time for the footer. And let's see what it looks like without giving it any sort of sizing. And we don't have any content, so everything's collapsed, so we can't see anything. So with sizing, I'm assuming the header should be I'm going to give it like 150 pixels of height. And we'll say width 100%. And this is going to look a little weird with just display flex. That's perfectly okay. I'm actually going to use percentages here. I'm sorry to change it up on you. We're going to say we want this to take up 25% of the top of the page. It'll just be easier for me to think of it this way. And then my main, the height will be 50%. And my footer, the height will be 25%. And let's take a look. I don't have a width, so it's still collapsed. Actually, this one should. Let's make sure I have this imported correctly. No typos. Just put some content in these. There we go. So we can see where they're at right now. I must be zoomed in or zoomed out. I'm just going to zoom in. All right, so we're set to display flex. So everything's in a row. I'm not happy with this height though. Oh, those are paragraphs. I'm in the wrong file. Sorry. The height. 25%, 50%. Let me make these VH. VH and VH. That way it's using the screen size. There we go. So this is taking up 50% of my screen height. This is taking up 25%. This is taking up 25%, but everything is in a row, and that's not what we want. So the solution for this is to put it in a column. So we're just going to do flex, direction, column. And there we go. Everything is now vertical again. So when we look at the drawing, we just switched everything. And did everyone see how I did that? That one little change there? I'll go back here in just a second. I want to move these down so that they're more similar. And this is really important to use these type of wireframes like this so that you can get an idea of how to lay out your page using Flexbox. Because remember, everything is in a container. I have another copy of that there. Okay, so we have our header, our main, and our footer. Now, inside of my main, I want to put some sections in there. And I think we're going to make this into 2 columns. And we'll have it'll be kind of like 3 columns, I guess. Yeah, so let's put one section here. We'll put another section beside it. Where'd that go? Okay. So looking at what I'm doing right now, how could I get these sections to be beside each other using Flexbox? So based on this drawing, I have section 1, and I'll make this section 2, nested inside of main. So how could I get these to be next to each other side by side using what we know so far of Flexbox?
Would you put display Flexbox in the main?
Yes, it would be display flex, and then it will put that as a flex item. So in my main, I would say display flex. Now I don't have those sections, so let me throw those in real quick. If we go here, I'll have a section. I'm just going to write content in here again so I can see where they're located. Section, content. And we'll give this an ID of section 1, an ID of, and this is just so I can quickly grab these with CSS. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give these a background color so we can clearly see them. This background color part is just a little bit of extra, just so we can see where they're located. Okay, so let's take a look at that. And there's our tomato and there's our violet. We can see those are already horizontal because I put them in display flex, but they're not taking up the right amount of width. Let's fix that with, I'm going to say width. I'm going to try 100% on both of these, and we'll see if it just kind of auto corrects it. I might have to set them to 50%. Yeah, so I'll have to put these at 50% because this blue violet, it looks like our main is bleeding through. Sure, I didn't have any typos there. I'll do 50 VW and 50 VW. And that's going to use 50% of my screen size that way. So this element, for some reason, I think it's because I have content in it. There we go. The content was pushing everything over. All right, so those are taking up 50% and 50%. So now we have these side by side. But what if I wanted this one to also be 2 columns? So I could have text on the left and maybe an image on the right. Let's take a look at our drawing. So this is section 1. So I would need to have a div here in order to divide this in half, and a div here. So what would I put into display flex in order to get these 2 divs side by side? Keep in mind these 2 divs are nested inside of section 1. So if section 1 is in display flex, then these 2 divs will be beside each other instead of on top of each other as they would be like by default. And we can see that here. So let me remove this content so that we don't have that same issue as last time. And I'm going to create a div with content and a div with content. Yes, Ryan.
So if you put like we put display flex in the main in the last step to get those 2 sections side by side, that wouldn't cascade down into the 2 divs.
No. So this section is not a flex container. Only the main is a flex container. And what I wanted to demonstrate right here is that you can nest flex containers inside of each other.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Good question. I'm actually going to put a little bit more text in here. We'll do lorem not times anything, just lorem. And for this one, I want to get a placeholder image, and I'll actually show you something real quick for whiteboarding. I believe it's placeholder.co. I'm just type placeholder image and it should come up. Placehold.co is the site. So that you can get these little squares like this. You just copy the URL and you plug that into your image. And you can change the size by changing this number. So if I change this to 500 in my URL, it'll actually change the size of that to 500. So pretty handy. And you can also add colors and everything to it. A little bit of a tangent, so let's not go down there. But yeah, it's just a cool little thing you can use for this. So what I want to do is put an image here. My SRC will be that placeholder, alt placeholder. And let's take a look at that. CSS demo. And it looks like my placeholder is huge. There we go. So I didn't put this into display flex yet. So this is on top of the image. Then we have that little content there. Let me put this into display flex and we'll take a look at what that does to it. And what I'm going to put into display flex is this section here, because this section has 2 children. Let me collapse them. So it's make this multi-line so I collapse it too. So we have two children in the section. So when this becomes a flex item, these will be horizontal to each other. So we have a div with text in it, and we have a div with an image in it. So we'll set section 1, display flex. And now we have the text on the left and the image on the right. What direction was our main axis going? For this section right here, the purple section?
It's going from left to right.
It is going from left to right. And what about our body? I'll just show the CSS real quick. So we have that as a column. So the body is going from top to bottom. The reason I wanted to show this is because I can move this content by using the cross axes and the main axes. So remember, the main axis is going from left to right. And if we look, everything's pretty good left to right. We're not too close here. I could add a little bit of space in between them if I want. I can actually shrink this image down. I'm going to shrink that image a little bit. That is a bit much. I'll just do that in here. I'll make that a 400 by 400 image. There we go. So this text here, I kind of want to bring this down so it's more centered in the page. And I also want to bring my image down so it's more centered in the page. I'm going to put space around on these and just see what happens. I'll see if we can get this off of this content over here. And then I'm going to bring those down. So first on section 1, because that's the section I'm working with, I'm going to say justify content, and we'll give it a space around. Let's see what that does for us. And if you look, we don't have any room to work with in here. Everything is tight because of the content. If I give this an inspect, it's not stretching or shrinking. So I'd actually have to hard set the pixel size on our text in order to get that to work. And I'll show you what I mean.
During the break, would you mind leaving that page there, that Flex Demo CSS up?
This code right here? Yeah.
So that I can copy that for my notes.
Yeah, and I can actually send you any code you want. Just send me a message in Slack, and I'll just copy and paste this to you if you need it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So section 1, I want to grab the first div inside of section 1. And I'm going to do that again using a class. And we'll just call this text. And I'm going to select that text here. And I'm going to give this a width of, we'll call it 70%. And this percentage is relative to its parent, and the parent is the div above it. So let's see what that does. Didn't seem to give us the results I expected. Let me take a look at my selector. So I put the class text on the div. Oh, because this isn't inside of a paragraph. I might have to hard code those pixels in then. So let's say 200 pixels. And there we go. Now our space around is working because I actually have to go to mobile view to get this to look right. So our space around is working. You can see the space here. We have the space there and a space there. And when I look at the div, you can see that it's using only 200 pixels of its width. You wouldn't normally hard code to pixels like that unless you needed to. In this case, I did it just because it was kind of a hacky layout with this not having a paragraph inside of my div. So that was the solution I chose to go with, was just assigning the pixels to it. So now I need to bring this text down. I want to make it lower. So remember, our main axis is left to right. So our cross axis is top to bottom. And let me show that on the drawing. So we have some text in here. This is text, if you couldn't tell. And this is an image. Normally an image is depicted by an X with a square on a wireframe. So I want to bring the text so it's lower. And remember, our main axis is running this way. Our cross axis is running this way. And that will change if I'm in column. Keep that in mind. So what I'm going to use now is align items. When you see the word align, think cross axes. When you see justify, think main axes. And then you have to check to see, are you in a row or are you in a column? So if I set align items center, I would expect that to move down to the center of the page because it's using the cross axes. And it also did the image and centered it as well because I selected both of those. Does anyone have any questions about that and how that worked? So hopefully seeing this wireframe 2 is helping with how you use Flexbox and how you can lay things out and how powerful this can be. So I'm actually going to put a few images in section 2. What we can do here is I can have an image like this and an image like this. Let me undo that. I'll just copy this one. So I want to have 3 images all stacked on top of each other. And then I want to put some text on this side here. So these are images. I'm going to put X's in them to depict that they're images. And I'll use the placeholders for that. And then this over here is going to be text. So what I'm going to have to do is actually put these inside of a container so that I can put them into display flex and set them to a column. And this is one of those things that'll have to come with practice to figure out how to make this work. So section 2 will have to be display flex so that section, I'll call this section 11 still. So section 11, and I'll put another one here. I don't actually need a section here, but I'm just going to have one. Section 11 and section 12 need to be side by side. So the parent element needs to be in display flex. But we can see here that everything inside of section 11 is on top of each other. So it's going to need to be display flex, but set as a column. So this is where you can keep nesting and nesting and nesting. Maybe I have another element in here and I wanted something horizontal. You could put another flex container, another flex item, you know, have one as a row and then have a column inside of that row. And you can lay out your entire page by pushing things apart. If I wanted all these toward the bottom, I could use Flexbox to do that. And I know this is a lot of information right now. I'm not expecting to be masters of Flexbox in one day. This is something that will take months of practice to figure out. And a lot of it's just playing around with it. But again, it's just practice. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So make sure that you are continuing to use these skills. So let me do this part here before I get into that break. I'm going to grab my placeholder text, put that in my clipboard already. And again, I need 2 containers here. So we'll go to my index. So this is the second one. I'll put 2 divs. There's one. And here's 2. Inside of the second div, I'm going to put a paragraph element. I'm going to put some lorem. Inside of the first one, I'm going to put 3 image tags. Image times 3. And they put them all on the same line. That's okay. We'll drop it down like that. And then I'm going to paste in my placeholder, but I'm going to make this 200 by 200, so it's a small image. Copy, paste, paste. Copy, paste, paste, paste. And let's see what we got. All right, so I have my 3 images horizontal right now, not what we want. We have the text under the image, also not what we want, but we haven't manipulated anything yet. So this div here, I'm going to call class img-wrapper. And I could have used an ID. I just chose to use a class just to remind you how to select with a class. And then we have our paragraph element down here. And I'm going to give this a class of text. Notice it's the same class name as up here. So this should get the same width as up here. It should also get all the same styles as up there. But this is not a paragraph, but it's still a container and the content is still the text. So it shouldn't make any difference as long as they have the same class name and the same number of children. So image wrapper is going to need to be set to display flex so that these could be stacked. Now let's see what we have right now with that text. So we can see it did give it the sizing. Let me go back into Flex Demo. And I'm going to select image wrapper. I believe I called it. I already forgot. This happens every time. IMG wrapper. IMG-wrapper. Remember, I used the dot to select a class. I put my code block in, and we're going to say display flex. Now, when I look at this, everything just got a little tighter, but we're not in a column yet. So we need to get these images on top of each other. So to do that, remember it's flex direction column. Now the images are going to be stacked. It looks like the sizing is going to be a little bit of an issue, but they are on top of each other. Before we fix the sizing issue, let's take a look at the parent element. And so this section 2, we're going to select that, and we're going to set it to display flex so that these two children are beside each other. And then hopefully that'll fix the sizing issue. So display flex, and we'll take a look. And there are 2 of the images we can see. It looks like we ran out of room. We'll do an inspect. So all 3 are there. But when I'm on a smaller screen size, it looks like they're spilling out of the container a little bit. So let me make these 100 by 100 so that they don't spill out. All right, so now they're on top of each other. They're not spilling out, and we have our text on the side. How can I make these images be spread out a little bit so that they're not on top of each other? So here's the parent. Here's the 3 images. And image wrapper is set to display flex. How can I make this spread out? There's a certain flex property.
Is there display flex start space between?
It's justify content. Yeah, and then we have space around and space between. I'll do space between so it pushes it all the way down. We'll see what that looks like. So this is all the way at the bottom. Let me switch it back to space around. And then we get a little bit of space on the bottom and the top. So now the next thing is, remember, this is the main axis. So justify content works like that. So now we have this flex box this way too. We have our section here. Remember, this tomato color is the section. And we have 2 children in there. Let me inspect, see if we can bring that up and show you. So here's section 2. We have 2 children. This is currently a flex container. We can see that by the flex item right there. So if I want to space these out now, what could I use? Keep in mind the main axis is horizontal in the moment because this flex isn't set to a column, this section here. It'll also be justify content. And I'm going to use space around again for that one, just so we get the not pushed up against the edges. Justify content, space around. And you can see that pushed it over. Let me close the DevTools so I can zoom in. Zoom out just a little bit because it's spilling. So we have the text at the top of the page. Do you remember how I did this last time? How did I move this text to the middle?
It's center align.
Align, because this is the cross axis. Down, vertical is the cross axis. So align items will move things on the cross axis. If we look at these images here, because they're in a column, if I were to want to move these left and right, I would use align items because my cross axis on this column is left and right. And I know this is a really confusing concept. Again, I don't expect you to be masters of this in one day. This is something that'll come with practice, and we are going to have more practice with this. Don't worry. So our cross axis on this column is left and right. The main axis is vertical. The cross axis for this overall tomato color, the main axis is left and right, and the cross axis is vertical. So it's the opposite of the column. So let me move the overall container, the tomato color, which is here. We'll say align items, and I'm going to align items center. And let's look at that. And now my text is in the center, and my images are now touching each other. What happened there? If I do an inspect, I'm betting we ran out of space. So there's no room to push them apart. See the div? The div is tight around these images right now. You can see that border whenever I highlight it. That's why they're all pushed up against each other. If I look at the section, though, there's a lot of room to work in here. All we need to really do is set the height on this div to be 100% of its container. And then that should solve that. So let's look at our index.html to see where that div is. It's this div right here, image wrapper. So I'm going to go down to image wrapper, and I'm going to set height. I want it to take up 100% of its parent, and there it's slid it back apart. And that's something you'll have to do sometimes. If it doesn't have enough space to work, you'll have to look in your dev tools to figure out what is happening. And this is a really good time to use your TAs. Whenever you are stuck on something like that, put something in the Slack. If somebody's available, we can immediately help you with that as well, especially if it's something small like that, where it might not feel small at the time, but if it's just like, I can't get this to put it where I want to put it, can somebody please look at my code, review my code for me? I can give you a response as soon as I see it, as long as I'm not occupied with anything else at that time. But as soon as I can reply, I will reply. So if you get stuck, put something in the Slack, make appointments with TAs, use your resources, use each other too, help each other solve these type of bugs. So does anyone have any questions about Flexbox before we do our 10-minute break? I know that was a lot of information. The main takeaways for Flexbox is the main axes and the cross axes. Let me see if this is actually in the documentation. I haven't looked at this in a while. We'll just look at Flex. So this is the Flex property. This is a little bit different. Let's see if I can just Flexbox structure. So here is an image that comes up. And this is called the Complete Guide to Flexbox. And I've seen a really good looking image. Let's see if I can find that again. I have no idea where that went. So I'm just going to go back here, see if I can zoom in on it or something. There we go. This right here, it might be a little blurry for you. We can always copy image address, paste it in there. So again, that's still a little blurry, but it's showing that it has a Flex container as the overall piece. We have our main axis, our cross axis, and it kind of shows you the overall structure of this. And then whenever we set it to a column, this whole thing rotates. So the main axis also rotates up, or sorry, down. It actually points down. All right, so I want to give you your 10-minute break before we get started on the assignment. So let's get that timer started, and I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Could you leave the CSS code up?
Yes, let me get you that. Do you want me to just send this to you?
Yeah, if that's easier, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind at all.
Thanks.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So let's go over our assignment for our little workshop. So for the workshop today, we're going to be doing that CSS Diner game. You just have to complete 16 levels. You don't have to complete the whole thing if you don't want to. If you want to complete all 32, go for it. I don't think that could be done in a half an hour without any prior experience with the selectors, because it is a little bit of reading of documentation to get through some of the later levels. Once you have your 16 levels, you'll take a screenshot and you'll submit it just like you did yesterday with the box model. And then for the coding part of the assignment, you're going to create an index.html inside of your new folder, which is called CSS Day 3. And you're going to have 9 elements inside of that index.html. Those can be divs, sections, whatever you want to use, paragraph elements. You can even use spans if you want. It doesn't matter. Just as long as you have 9 elements. And you'll be applying one of the position/display properties to each element. The goal here isn't to make something that looks good. It's to give you an understanding of how these properties work. So if you were following along today, you might already have some of this completed. If not, that's okay. This is a really good opportunity for you to look at the documentation. So if I go to the display and we bring that up in documentation, we actually have display block, display inline block, display none. These are the 3 that you need to use for display. And right there basically is your solution. You'll just have to select those using appropriate selectors, whether it be class or ID or by the element name. And the goal is to see how those respond with each other. So once you have your one static, one position relative, and one position absolute, and one position fixed, one position sticky. Once you have all of those, then you'll move on to the displays, and you'll have one display block, one display inline block, and one display none. And again, the goal is just to experiment and see how those interact with each other. Try adding distinct borders. This isn't something I did during the demo, but this can help you. You could also try adding an outline if you want. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll do it with this section 1. We can do outline. We'll do 2 pixels, red, solid. And if I look at the results for that, it's kind of hard to see because I'm zoomed way out. Let me zoom in. We get this red line around the element. So it can kind of show us how things are laid out like that. The reason I use outline instead of border is because it doesn't affect the size of the box model. So if I look at my box model for that element, there's no border on it, so it's not pushing it by that amount of pixels. It's not pushing the other elements around. Just something to keep in mind for debugging. That's not the instructions. And then as far as Flexbox goes, you can experiment with that if you have time, but that's not part of the assignment. We're going to be diving deeper into Flexbox tomorrow, but I definitely wanted to give this introduction today so that tomorrow you're not feeling completely overwhelmed, because we're also going to be diving into grid, which is another layout technique similar to Flexbox. But again, I don't expect anyone to be masters of grid or Flexbox in a day or even a week for that matter. It takes a long time to get good with them, but you'll be able to leverage them using your documentation and trial and error. You'll be able to get results out of them. So we can go ahead and get started on that. I'll bring up the rubric here real quick. So for the link, it's actually in the rubric and it's in the instructions, and I placed it inside of the class chat as well. I'm going to throw this inside of the Slack cohort October 2 so that we have it. So that's the link to the CSS game. And for implementation of CSS, make sure you have your 9 CSS elements and you use all of the required display and position properties that were listed in the instructions. And that's it for the assignment, is those 2 things. So just to remind you what those were, if you look at this bullet here, we have one position static, one position relative, one position absolute, fixed, and sticky. So that's for your positions. And then we have the displays down here. Display block, display inline, and display inline block, and display none. So once you have all of those and the 16 levels of the CSS Diner, the assignment will be complete. Does anyone have any questions about the assignment? And I'll actually go over a few of the CSS Diner levels. If anyone was confused earlier, I'll go back to, I'm on level 1 again. So again, these plate elements is mocking HTML. It's to try to give you an idea of what this would look like in HTML. And so to select an element in HTML, you just use the element selector by typing in the element name. So to select all of the plates, I type in plate, I press enter, and that's level 1 complete. Now I want to select the bento elements. So in the CSS selector over here, in order to select this element, I'm going to type in bento. And then normally this is where you'd put in your curly brackets and your code block. Those are already here. They're on line 2 and line 4. So I'm just going to press enter. And then we want to select by ID in order to get this fancy plate. And if you highlight these, it also tells you the element, and we can see the code viewer over here. So it's to select by ID. I could do plate. Sorry, not plate. I would do ID fancy. So I did the little hashtag and I type in fancy. So does anyone have any questions about how this works? And again, you can always look on the right over here. You see the descendant selector. It's giving you some information on how it would expect you to solve it. I'm not worried about if you do exactly what it says, just as long as you get through the levels. And then if you hit the little hamburger menu here, it'll show you all of the levels you've currently completed. And it gives you the type of selector it would expect you to use. Just make sure that you screenshot this section here. You can screenshot the whole page, but make sure that these check marks show up in the screenshot. Otherwise, you can go to that level. So if we're on level 16, and as long as there's a green check mark on 16, you can take a screenshot of that as well, and that's perfectly fine because you can't skip levels on this. So I don't think you can. I guess you can. Just make sure you do take a screenshot of the list here so we can get the proof of that. Again, this is a good opportunity for you to collaborate with each other on these. If somebody gets stuck, feel free to collaborate and help each other.
I'm stuck on the very last one, on the the very last level that you wanted us to get to on that game.
The only child selector?
No, the first child selected.
That's level 15.
Oh, I thought. Sorry, I misread it. I thought I had completed 15.
Okay, so the first child will select the first child. If you have multiple children, so if you look at that plate, it has 3 children. And we want to select the first child of the plate, right? But the first, you don't actually select the plate itself. You have to select the element that's the children are the oranges, not the plate.
Right.
So if you want to select the first child, you have to select the first orange. So you're going to put in orange first child.
Oh.
Because you're not actually selecting it's not the parent getting the first child, it's the first child, but you have to list the child's name.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's a little different.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then 16, they're going to try to trick you. So good luck there. Let me know if you get stuck.
I got that one.
Nice. Yep. So just open up the little hamburger menu, take the screenshot, and put that inside of your root folder for your submission.
Luis, so Ryan is done with it. I'm not sure about the others, but I'm stuck on number 7. I'm kind of confused here.
Okay. So number 7 is the class selector, but it's also in combination with the element selector. So what it's telling you to do is put in the element name dot class name.
I don't know if you could hear me or not. Element is plate and bento, or
Yeah,
orange.
so
Actually, we are selecting oranges. That's what I'm confused with.
it would be the orange.
Orange dot small.
Yes,
I
the
did
class
it.
name is,
It's not working. Let me try again.
yeah, so there shouldn't be any spaces. It should just be orange dot small.
I see. Yeah, I was applying a space actually. Thank you so much.
Yeah, when you put a space, it does the sibling selector. So it's looking for a class inside of the orange then.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Louis, could you give us a hand with number 8?
Number 8. Let's take a look.
Find the small oranges in the bento.
Yeah, so if you did what you did in the previous one, where
Mhm.
you do the orange dot small, you'll see that all 3 small oranges light up, right?
Yeah.
But if you, in front of orange dot small, place the bento element, so to be bento space orange dot small, then it will only select the small oranges that are children of the bentos.
Oh, okay. I was adding extra stuff. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. I'm going to stop the recording there. I forgot to do that earlier. Does